Bugatti didn't think that we were going to be able to separate this car in half.
Can't do that in a garage.
Since Bugatti decided early on there wasn't going to sell us any parts for this car,
We just don't think it's safe.
we've had to improvise and make everything ourselves.
What happens when a company decides your multi-million-dollar car isn't worth fixing? That question has followed one wrecked Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport through an entire year of drama, and it still doesn't have a clean answer. The factory declared the car a total loss and walked away. Independent mechanic Mat Armstrong picked it up anyway, rebuilding it piece by piece with no factory support.
We'll do everything we can to try and get this car back on the road without Bugatti's help or with Bugatti's help.
Then a custom body kit, meant to finish the story instead, split his audience right down the middle. Now new claims are spreading online about what Armstrong does next, and not all of them hold up. This video separates what's actually confirmed from what's still just theory. The reveal that broke the internet. For months, audiences had watched an independent rebuild move forward, one impossible task at a time. A transmission split by hand, a shattered engine mount replaced, a car dragged back from a total structural write-off. Then came the reveal nobody was fully braced for. With no way to source the vehicle's original body panels, the workshop unveiled a fully custom exterior, a bespoke kit built by a Dubai-based customization outfit, reportedly costing somewhere in the region of $700,000. The reaction was immediate, and it was unforgiving. Comment sections filled within hours, criticizing the proportions, the design language, and how far the new shape had drifted from the clean lines the model is famous for. What is it about a single design choice that can turn a hard-won rebuild into a punchline overnight? Some viewers framed the result as a genuine engineering achievement, a workaround born from necessity, not vanity, on a car that had no other realistic path back to the road. Others were far less generous, arguing the finished shape barely resembled the vehicle it used to be. The mechanic behind the build addressed the criticism directly on camera, explaining that with no original panels available and a salvage title already attached to a one-of-a-kind car, the situation had been treated as a chance to create something new rather than simply restore what was lost. That explanation did little to quiet the response. Side-by-side comparison images stacked the new design against factory renderings. Screenshots circulated across forums for days, and the wrecked hypercar briefly became one of the most discussed vehicles anywhere in automotive media. Was the backlash really about the shape of a bumper? Or was it about something bigger, a sense that this particular car had earned a more faithful ending after everything it survived? Longtime followers of the rebuild had cheered every improvised fix along the way. A hatchback's airbags, custom-built radiators, a donor exhaust fabricated from scratch. Each of those choices had been framed as proof that dedication could substitute for a factory's blessing. The body kit felt different to a lot of viewers, less like an improvisation and more like a departure, and that shift in tone is what turned enthusiasm into argument almost overnight. There is also a simpler explanation worth considering, one that has nothing to do with engineering philosophy at all. People form attachments to specific shapes. A silhouette this recognizable carries decades of design language behind it, and altering that silhouette, even for a car with no other realistic path back to the road, was always going to provoke a stronger reaction than swapping an airbag or fabricating a radiator ever could. Mechanical improvisation happens mostly out of sight. A finished exterior does not.
We've got airbags to fix, chassis damage to fix, and radiators as well, all of which we need to be able to source or repair ourselves.
It is the one part of a rebuild every viewer can judge instantly, without any technical background at all. And that accessibility is exactly what turned a niche engineering story into a much wider public argument within a matter of hours. None of that reaction changes what actually happened mechanically to reach this point, though. and understanding that part of the story matters just as much as the noise around how the finished car looks. The impossible Bugatti revival. Long before anyone was arguing about a bumper, this project was a straightforward structural nightmare. The crash had crumpled the front end, deployed every airbag, and damaged the transmission badly enough that reaching it meant physically separating the front tub from the rear drivetrain frame. A procedure the manufacturer had said belonged strictly inside a factory environment. The independent crew did it anyway, working bolt by bolt through a modular design never intended to be opened outside official channels. What did they find once the car came apart? Worse news than expected. A shattered cast aluminum engine mount support. A pinched coolant line. The kind of hidden secondary damage that only reveals itself once a technician is actually inside the structure, rather than reading a report about it. From there, the build became an exercise in substitution. Original replacement airbags were unavailable through any authorized channel, so the team sourced compatible units from an unrelated Volkswagen Group hatchback, chosen because the mounting points and specifications lined up closely enough to work safely. 10 separate radiators managed the cooling demands of this car's 16-cylinder engine, and several had been destroyed in the crash. Rather than wait on parts that were never coming, custom units were fabricated from scratch. A specialist shop handled a bespoke exhaust system when no factory replacement existed anywhere. There is a reason this stretch of the story rarely trended the way the body kit did. It was slow, unglamorous, and did not resolve in a single dramatic thumbnail. Months separated the initial teardown from the day the engine finally caught and ran. Suppliers missed deadlines. Parts arrived that did not fit on the first attempt. A wiring fault took days to trace to its source. None of it made for a viral clip, but all of it is what actually separated this project from a cosmetic flip, designed to look finished while hiding what was wrong underneath. Consider what this procedure would normally require. A manufacturer this controlling typically insists that structural work of this scale happen only within its own certified network, using proprietary tooling and technicians trained specifically on that platform. An independent crew working through the same separation with careful documentation and off-the-shelf equipment did not just move one rebuild forward. It quietly challenged one of the central justifications for why this category of repair supposedly cannot exist outside a factory floor in the first place. That challenge is easy to lose sight of once the conversation shifts entirely toward how the finished exterior looks. But it remains the more consequential part of the whole project. When the front and rear sections were finally reunited and bolted back into a single structure, and the engine turned over for the first time since the crash.
That is sounding good. The radiator seems to be holding. The car is running to temperature.
The car was still far from complete. No exterior panels, missing trim, a long list of smaller jobs still open. But it ran, under its own power, built almost entirely from improvisation and donor parts, rather than a single component sourced through the manufacturer that built it originally. That moment should have been the emotional peak of the entire saga. In a lot of ways, it was, right up until the exterior question forced its way to the front of the conversation and never really left. The rebuild that changed the industry conversation. Step outside the comment section for a moment, and a quieter reaction has been building among the people who actually work in this space. Custom coach builders have existed for decades, taking factory vehicles and transforming them into something entirely their own. And most of that work happens by choice rather than necessity. A wealthy client wanting something louder, sharper, or more aggressive than what left the assembly line. This project inverted that entire premise. Nobody involved set out chasing a design statement. A supply problem forced the decision, and the finished shape carried every compromise that process demanded. Whether viewers judging it against voluntary builds realized that context or not. independent specialists in the wider repair community have been paying close attention for a different reason entirely. What does it mean for their own businesses if a manufacturer can effectively strand a total loss vehicle indefinitely, simply by declining to release parts? Several voices in that space have pointed to this exact saga as evidence for a broader argument they have been making for years: that owners, not manufacturers, should retain final say over how a vehicle gets repaired once it leaves the factory floor. Whether or not this specific rebuild ever becomes a landmark case, it has already become a reference point in that ongoing conversation. That reference point carries weight because of scale, not sentiment. Several hundred examples of this particular model exist worldwide, and every single one will eventually need work that falls outside routine servicing. A collision, a component failure, a modification an owner wants that the manufacturer will not sanction. Most of those owners currently have exactly one real option if a factory declines to help: accept the answer and wait, or attempt something close to what this project has spent a year proving is at least technically possible. A documented precedent does not need to touch every vehicle in that population to matter. It only needs to exist as a credible alternative the next time a manufacturer says no, and that alone shifts leverage in a negotiation that previously had none. Not everyone in the industry sees it that way, though. Some specialists have been openly critical of the pace and transparency of this particular project, arguing that filming every decision for an audience introduces pressure to move faster than caution would normally allow. Should a rebuild this complex be happening in front of a camera at all, or does that visibility create risks a private workshop would never accept? That disagreement rarely makes it into the loudest headlines, but it represents a far more substantive debate than the one playing out over panel gaps and paint finish. Bugatti finally breaks its silence. Separate from the noise around the body kit sits a quieter, more documented thread: what the manufacturer itself has actually said and done throughout this saga, as opposed to what has been assumed about its motives. Early on, the company locked the vehicle's identification number.
I literally see the full car on car vertical, and all it took was me to put the VIN number in. So regardless of whether that car gets fixed by Bugatti or not.
A move that in practice meant no authorized dealer anywhere could sell parts for this specific chassis. The stated position was direct. The car had been ruled a structural write-off. Its integrity could no longer be guaranteed, and the company would not put its name behind a repair it had not performed itself. There was a technical argument underneath that stance, and it was not without weight. Splitting a monocoque of this complexity is not a task most workshops are equipped to attempt safely, and if the independent build had gotten that part wrong, the risk would not have been cosmetic. It would have meant a multi-million-dollar vehicle with compromised structural integrity potentially returning to public roads. Should a manufacturer be blamed for caution on a point like that, even when the caution also happens to protect its own repair revenue? That question sits underneath almost every disagreement in this entire saga, and it rarely gets a clean answer from either side. The tension between those two motives, genuine safety concern and commercial self-interest, is precisely why this dispute resists a tidy conclusion. A company that profits enormously from controlling its own service network has every financial reason to discourage outside repair, regardless of whether the underlying safety argument holds up in a specific case. That does not make the safety argument automatically false. It simply means the argument arrives from a source with an obvious stake in the outcome, and audiences following this saga have been right to weigh both halves of that equation rather than accepting either one at face value. What followed was unusual for a company of this size. The chief executive engaged publicly, pushing back on some of the inflated cost figures circulating in comment sections, while also stating the door had not fully closed. The vehicle could still be brought in for inspection and repair on the factory's own terms. That was never framed as a blank check for an independently filmed rebuild, and it was not treated as one. As the rebuild progressed and kept producing verifiable, documented engineering work rather than guesswork, the company's position reportedly softened further. The parts blacklist was said to have been lifted, and earlier repair estimates were revised downward, a quiet acknowledgement that the original numbers had not told the complete story either. That softening never resolved into an endorsement, though, and it should not be mistaken for one. What exists on the record is a documented sequence, a lockout, a public dispute over costs, and a partial retreat, not a resolution, and certainly not the kind of formal ultimatum or private negotiation some corners of the internet have since started describing in dramatic detail. It is worth pausing on why a company this size chose to engage publicly at all, rather than simply ignoring an independent rebuild the way most manufacturers would. A crashed hypercar sitting in a rented workshop should have been a non-story from the manufacturer's perspective. Write it off, move on, let the salvage market handle the rest. Instead, weeks of sustained public attention forced a response, and that response itself became part of the story being told about the company. Silence would have cost nothing. Engagement carried real risk, since every public comment became something the audience could measure against what actually happened next. That the company chose engagement anyway.
But I can't just call up Bugatti to buy new ones.
So the car would have to be on site with ourselves, that new parts get ordered, you see.
So now I've got to figure out where all these parts come from.
Says something about how much visibility this single rebuild had already generated before any official statement was ever made. Fact vs. fiction. Separating the rebuild from the rumors. This is the section where the two categories need to be kept separate, because a lot of recent coverage has started blending them together. This is confirmed. The crash happened. The vehicle was declared a total loss. The identification number was locked. Parts access was cut off. And the rebuild proceeded through donor components and custom fabrication, rather than factory support. This is confirmed. A custom body kit, costing roughly $700,000, was fitted because original panels were never available, and the reveal triggered widespread public criticism. This is confirmed. The manufacturer's chief executive engaged publicly with the saga, disputed some circulating cost figures, and the company's restrictions reportedly eased somewhat as the rebuild continued. Now the other category. This is theory, not yet verified. Claims that the manufacturer sent a formal offer or ultimatum tied to a public retraction, a mass deletion of previous videos, or a binding agreement never to work on one of its vehicles again. No statement to that effect has come from either the manufacturer or the mechanic at the center of this story, and no documentation supporting it has surfaced anywhere traceable. This is theory, not yet verified. The growing chatter linking this project to a formal partnership with an established European coach builder. Several creators have floated the idea as the next chapter, and the timing lines up with a broader conversation happening across the industry about independent right to repair. But as of now, neither side involved has confirmed anything beyond speculation. Why does that distinction matter so much here? Because the gap between a documented cost dispute and an invented corporate ultimatum is not a small one. It is the difference between reporting a story and inventing one for engagement. A rebuild this well documented does not need a fabricated confrontation to stay compelling. The verified version already carries enough tension on its own. An owner who refused to give up on a total loss. A manufacturer that drew a hard line and then partially walked it back. And a mechanic willing to let every mistake play out in public view rather than edit around it. Treating rumor as confirmed fact does a disservice to everyone actually involved. The owner still working to make this project financially sound, the mechanic whose credibility depends on getting details right, and the audience trying to follow a genuinely complicated story without being fed invented drama dressed up as a leak. There is a pattern worth naming here, because it extends well beyond this one saga. Stories involving secretive letters, hidden ultimatums, and last-minute confrontations spread faster than careful, documented reporting almost every time, regardless of the subject. The format itself is built for engagement. A single dramatic reveal, a villain with clear motive, a hero forced into an impossible choice. Real corporate disputes rarely resemble that structure. They tend to be slower, messier, and full of partial retreats rather than clean confrontations, which makes them far less shareable but far more accurate. Recognizing that gap matters for any viewer trying to separate what happened from what simply made for a better thumbnail. A useful test for any claim circulating around this saga is simple enough to apply in real time. Has the person or company being described actually said the words attributed to them, on record, anywhere traceable? Does the claim originate from a documented statement or from a second-hand account with no named source behind it? A rebuild this heavily filmed leaves an unusually complete paper trail. Video timestamps, public comments, direct statements from everyone involved. Claims that cannot be located anywhere inside that trail deserve exactly the skepticism they are currently not receiving from large parts of the audience passing them along. Who really owns your car? Step back from the panel gaps and the pricing disputes for a moment, and a larger question sits underneath all of it. Who actually gets to decide what a machine is worth once it leaves the place that built it? For decades, the answer for hypercars has been simple. The manufacturer decides, through service networks, parts access, and the quiet threat of a voided warranty. Owning one of these vehicles has never meant total ownership in the way people assume. It has meant conditional custody.
It's, people who own these cars, they buzz off that. They buzz off someone looking at them knowing that you have got money to burn because you drive a Bugatti.
Dependent on staying inside a system controlled almost entirely by the company that sold it to you. This saga is a stress test of that arrangement, whether anyone involved set out to make it one or not. An owner who refused to accept a total loss verdict. A mechanic willing to document every failure instead of hiding it. A manufacturer forced to explain its own numbers in public for the first time in years. None of that required a secret letter or a hidden ultimatum to matter. It required patience, documentation, and an audience large enough to hold every party accountable in real time. Does a machine belong more to the person who paid for it, or to the company that still controls how it can be fixed? That question extends far beyond one crashed hypercar in a Miami workshop. It touches every industry where manufacturers control access to parts, information, and repair. From farm equipment to smartphones to the family car in a driveway. The louder this particular saga gets, the more it becomes a case study for that exact fight, whether the headline of the week is accurate or invented. There is a version of this ending that satisfies no one entirely, and that may be the most honest outcome available. The owner recoups less than expected. The manufacturer never fully concedes it was wrong. The mechanic keeps working, imperfectly, in public, because that has always been the entire premise of the channel. Clean resolutions make for satisfying finales, but they rarely reflect how disputes like this actually settle in the real world, where most conflicts fade into an uneasy equilibrium rather than a decisive victory for either side. Consider how differently this entire saga would read if the body kit had simply been left unmade, the car sitting stripped and unfinished in a corner of the workshop, while the legal and financial pressure quietly mounted. That version would generate almost no attention at all, despite carrying nearly identical stakes for the owner involved. The willingness to finish the job in full public view, mistakes included, is what turned a private financial gamble into a story people across the industry are still arguing about months later. Visibility, more than any single decision made along the way, is what elevated this rebuild from a personal project into something resembling a referendum on an entire repair model. What comes next for this specific car is still genuinely unclear. Another design revision, a formal partnership that may or may not materialize. or simply years of quiet ownership once the noise online finally settles. What is not unclear is the precedent already sitting in the historical record. An outsider took on a job a billion-dollar company said was impossible, documented every mistake instead of hiding them, and forced a public conversation.
You're not paying for the actual job of taking it off and putting it back on again. You're paying for the experience and the knowledge to know how to do it and the tools to do it.
About who really controls what people believe they own. So who really owns a car once the factory that built it says no? That question opened this video, and the honest answer is still unsettled. A Bugatti once called worthless is running again. A body kit split an audience down the middle. A CEO who tried to shut this down ended up quietly walking back his own numbers. Every rumor still circling Armstrong's next move deserves real scrutiny, not blind repetition. That's the real story here. Not a secret letter, not a leaked ultimatum, just an owner, a mechanic, and a year of receipts. Subscribe, because when this gets confirmed, you'll see it here first.